there's a couple of things I want to talk about. One is the idea that this coronavirus, COVID-19, is somehow has flu-like symptoms, the quote-unquote flu-like symptoms, and also the idea that it's a hoax. The other thing I want to talk about is Bill Gates and his very, very large, I think it's like 100 meters yacht, super yacht that he has. And a little bit about Bill Gates and in relation to the finger he has in many pies, but one of them is this coronavirus vaccine. The other thing is this idea of folks thinking the herd immunity thing is a great thing, and they're quite happy to just blow off boomers and basically old people. I'm going to talk about that too. So the first thing I wanted to comment on is firstly, like I see sometimes in comment sections, including my own, this idea that COVID-19, it's just a sort of like a kind of like a flu really, and there's too much hype about it. I don't know if you've seen that video I posted a couple of videos ago by an ICU doctor from the UK, from the University College Clinic. He talks about how this COVID-19 presents itself in a very different way to the flu. It has a vascular component to it, which means that eventually patients start to the blood supply to their lungs starts to become clotted, and the clotting factor, I think, is increased in COVID-19, and so there isn't blood getting with oxygen to the lungs, and in fact it's carrying CO2. It's basically not supplying the lungs with the needed oxygen, and it sort of goes downhill from there. And also there's usually a lot of organ failure because sepsis steps in. And so between apparently the clotting factor is off the charts, they say. Too much clotting happening, which is dangerous to lungs. Like you can get embolisms, you can have strokes, all that kind of thing. That's what happens, with a build-up of, and so anti-clotting medication like heparin and different things like that can address things like that. But I don't know the whole etiology of it all. I don't know the whole way it plays out, but I know that it's not just the flu. When there's a vascular component like that, it's very, very dangerous. It doesn't respond like, to how one would treat, say, pneumonia. So I wish that people would stop with with this thing about it being like the flu. It is not like that. And I've worked in ICU as a registered nurse, and I can imagine that it would be pretty dire if someone actually has to be intubated, and because at that stage things have probably really progressed in that, clotting and all of that kind of thing, and then sepsis steps in and all of that. So, it's not just like the flu, and it's not just like pneumonia either. Anyway, so that's. I really invite you to look at that video I did of a video I ripped from 7:30 report. It's only like 5 minutes, and they're talking to that ICU specialist, and it's very interesting what he says about it. So I take his word for it rather than just go with like the flu. Secondly, Bill Gates, I invite you to look at the Grey Zone. I think it was the Grey Zone who did, or is it Minpress News? Minpress News, Whitney Webb, I think, might have done something on Bill Gates and in relation to COVID-19, but I think maybe it was the Grey Zone talking about it in a live stream with Anya Parenpil. Anyway, I will post a link to that, so please look at that, because he really has a lot of interest in this, Bill Gates, and I think there's a lot of money to be made here. But it's also a little bit scary at the same time, but I'm not going to go into it. You can check out that. But Bill Gates, he's got a super yacht. It's like a $645 million yacht, and it's supposed to be eco-friendly, but it still requires, I suppose, diesel as well as the hydrogen that's powering it. if everything goes to hell in a handbasket at some point, people like Bill Gates, I think that floating around in the ocean on their gigantic yacht, super yacht, is going to save them from, the impending social inequality, or if it's whatever the disaster is, if it's another pandemic that really is more crazy than this one, or nuclear war, or just social breakdown due to massive inequality, which is sort of, it's heading in that direction. The US is almost like a quote-unquote canary in the coal mine, for want of a better, for not wanting to use a species as metaphor, but I mean that's that's what the US is heading for, and this pandemic is hastening that, because the US is, the government, which does not care about its people at all, is more than happy to try and use this to further disenfranchise people, and then take their assets when they become homeless or whatever. Corporations buying up assets, always seems to be what happens in these sort of, when the economy takes a big crash like this. At the same time, Donald Trump is trying to, I'm going off away from Bill Gates for a moment, but Donald Trump he wants to desperately open up the economy, because I think he's worried that his numbers are going to be, the people who normally vote for him aren't going to vote for him if the economy is in bad shape by November. And so he's further willing to risk the lives of many, so that he can get re-elected. I mean, it's truly, it's astonishing on one hand how bad this is, and on the other hand, it's totally not surprising, considering how far gone the US is, the government and all of that. And I'm not just talking about Trump, I'm just talking about the whole disaster capitalism thing. So, it's sad in that regard. So he's actually set up a sort of a group of some kind to open the economy, sort of a cabinet of group or something. So he's really desperate to get things moving so that it doesn't look bad for him. I mean, whoa, and I mean, they're at 545,000 cases now, and that's probably an underestimate because they're not testing people. And as the Chinese Center for Disease Control head said, that there's a lot of asymptomatic people walking around, and that's when the virus is shedding the most and is very contagious. And he said basically, unless you make sure that asymptomatic people are, you're sort of testing people and testing a lot of people and finding out who's asymptomatic and who's shedding the virus, it's going to be a bit of a disaster. And he put a big poo-poo on the whole herd immunity thing, that he basically said no civilized society should be okay with the herd immunity thing, because a lot of people are going to die because of it. And I will talk about that a little later, about what I was saying about there are people, sadly, in the US that think the herd immunity thing is a good idea. And that just fits, I may as well talk about it now, and I'll get back to Bill Gates, and that just fits in hand in glove with the whole, this mean-spiritedness in a capitalist society where it's a sort of a dog-eat-dog, for want of a better metaphor, and this survival of the fittest kind of nonsense. There's an interesting thing about that whole idea of just let the old people die and whomever is, sort of weak and whatever. To me, that just shows it's complete spiritual malaise in that country, if that's what people are, if that's what some people are thinking. And you have to think of it like this. If you're an expendable category, right? Like if you think, with a great idea about the herd mentality, did I say herd mentality or herd immunity? I'm sorry. Herd immunity. if you're a proponent of the whole, oh, let's just let it run through the population, and then whoever survives, and whoever doesn't, and it'll be old people that won't, mostly. There'll be young people too, because they're also victims of this virus, but there'll be a lot of older people. So if you're a proponent of that, just keep in mind something, that in a society that likes to sort of select certain categories of people to be expendable, at some point it's going to come around to you, because at some point, say, the government could say, well, we're not going to, there's a lot of people, most people die from cardiac issues in the United States, and second to that is cancer. At the present time, third is the COVID-19. So the first group, that's the highest group that dies is from cardiac disease. So the United States government, no matter whoever's in, if it's even more fascist than Trump is, could say, well, we don't really, we don't want to spend so much money on these people with these cardiac diseases. So you're not going to get any sort of health insurance industries aren't even going to give you any sort of support, any sort of coverage. Forget Medicare for all, but health insurance industries are just going to, and we're not going to take responsibility for it either. So that wipes out a whole other group. Or they could say, well, there's, maybe in say 20 years' time, when diabetes has really come into being in the United States, and they can see that 1 in 3 people may have it, they could say, well, diabetes is a real problem, and we're not going to take responsibility for that. When we don't have Medicare for all here in the health insurance industry, we're totally fine with them saying we're going to exclude people that have diabetes. And there's a lot of people won't be adopting a plant-based diet, which can actually reverse, and this has been proven. I'm not speaking out of my hat. A lot of people can actually reverse diabetes too, type 2, with a plant-based diet, if they get it sort of in the early stages and it's not really far gone. But I think, there's been a lot of success with that. So a lot of people aren't going to do that. So therefore, a lot of people will die from they won't be able to afford the insulin, which is marked up, to the blazes in the US. This is where this sort of idea of I'm okay, Jack, I've got mine, that sort of attitude is going to eventually come back to you if you believe in this whole herd immunity thing. If you're advocating for that, and you're quite happy to, for one, just think that if you actually don't die early, you're going to be old one day. And imagine people saying, well, you're expendable. You're already irrelevant because we don't see old people as contributing much. They're a nuisance. They're a drain on the economy, in quotes. But on top of that, people will be speaking about you like that. And it'll probably be worse then, because those attitudes don't stop there. Once you allow that sort of attitude of, oh, herd immunity, that's fine. Well, who cares about the old people? They're a big drain on everything. And let's have a youthful society and sort of thing. Like a bit of a Logan's Run type thing. When you start there and you allow that to sort of progress on, that attitude isn't going to stop there. So that sort of, eventually it'll all come back to you at some point. Just like how the government has been treating black and brown people overseas. Now that is coming home to roost very strongly. It's been like that for black and brown people within the United States, but now it's actually biting white people in the arse too. And now suddenly white people are freaking out and thinking, oh my God, we have to do something about it. They didn't worry too much when black and brown people were being oppressed in a structural racist society, but now that things are starting to move into their corner of the woods, and they're starting to be negatively affected, now people are starting to worry about the government and what they're doing. This is where it never ever stops. These attitudes never ever stop at one group. And that's why whatever happens to one person, whatever injustice happens to one person, eventually, we all must care about it. It all comes back, even if it's just in a selfish sense. Hopefully it's not coming from a selfish position, but I mean, even in a selfish sense, you should care about any group that's being oppressed anywhere in the world, because eventually that sort of oppression comes back home to roost. And that's what's happening right now. Whatever's being done by our governments to other black and brown people overseas is now going to visit you, or is visiting you. And no gigantic yacht floating around in the ocean is going to save Bill Gates from a social breakdown. I mean, my partner was telling me about these little sort of small boats in South China Sea, and they have incredible weapons on these boats, and they basically, you know, carry on pirate activities. You know, they, and if everything broke down and Bill Gates' sort of Bill Gates' super yacht ran out of fuel, and the people on the yacht that have been servicing the various things that are on the yacht, I mean, sort of go, well, why do we need to look after you, Bill? You know, why, what it makes you so special? This social breakdown, what does money mean anymore? And there are, you know, there are things that are going to break down on his yacht eventually, and there'll be nobody to either fix it, or there'll be no resources like steel to access. These very rich people get to where they are stepping on the heads and necks of other people. And then eventually money just makes more money. But really all they are is a person with this imaginary sort of thing that actually today only means something because there are people in power with power of the military and all of that. I would say if they didn't have the military behind them, I think they might be in, like if the US government didn't have such a powerful military and so much social control already through police and whatever, because the police were always designed to protect the wealthy and the oligarchs. It wasn't about protecting you and I. So if the government and all these didn't have all that behind them, I think they'd probably be in trouble in the US with the amount of social inequality there right now. And they're already the Pentagon has already been working on how to control things when there is social breakdown. So they wouldn't be thinking that way. The Pentagon and all of that wouldn't be going that way if there wasn't this plan to allow for a massive social breakdown, meaning taking away pretty much everything that people have because people are disposable, the politics of disposability. So, but Bill Gates and people like that who think that they're going to escape on their super yachts and be okay, and that they'll be untouchable, or that they'll be able to escape what's coming. If it comes, and I think it's probably going to get much, much worse before it gets better, if it gets better, people like Bill Gates have no idea what's going to happen, really. They have no idea what's going to happen. They rely on people to do things for them and to maintain these big yachts and all of that. And there's people that have to get the resources like steel and all of this to fix different things. And there'll be people like the people in the South China Sea with their little tiny boats, and they can fire, and Bill Gates security can fire as many weapons as they want at people, and eventually they'll run out of bullets because somebody has to make the bullets, right? There's not an infinite supply of bullets on his super yacht. So, you know, eventually the masses will be coming out to this super yacht in their little boats with their own weapons and stuff, or just overwhelm them. I mean, you see what I'm saying? It's just sort of like people like Bill Gates and like him, the super, super wealthy, cannot escape social breakdown, no matter how many super yachts they have and how many little bits of land they have tucked away. And money will mean nothing at that point, and they won't have anybody really to protect them, because people will say, fuck you, Bill. You know, why should I be doing this for you? I mean, at the present time, they might be getting really good wages to be on his side and look after him. You know, it's sort of its security for him to have people being paid very well, but eventually that won't make it matter. So anyway, that's my thoughts on Bill Gates and people like him that are ultra wealthy, people like Jeff Bezos But the herd immunity issue, I'm sorry if I was calling it herd mentality, but I guess that's part of it too. You know, if you have a herd mentality that it's okay that people die, so that, you know, you can, because you don't want to be stuck up in your house anymore, or I can understand if you're worried about financial security, but I mean, one shouldn't be taking it out on other people in the society. You should be fucking striking and doing everything you can to form non-violent grassroots movements and change things, not just say to oneself, well, let's all, you know, fuck this, fuck having to stay inside and social isolate and stuff. I want to go out and go down to Starbucks and have a drink, or go and visit my friends and have a meal and stuff. So I don't care if a bunch of old people die, or maybe a few in my own age bracket. I want to go out and have some fun. So herd immunity is where it is. And I can understand where people are going, I want to be able to, I don't trust the government to cover me financially. I can get that. This is only going to go downhill. So the way to do this is not to end up having millions of people die, so that so that people can keep this awful disaster capitalism going, because that's what's going to continue on. If you don't buck up against this right now, when it's on life support and it's all exposed for the awful, disastrous capitalist death machine that it is, if you don't push against that now and do something now, you're going to be in a worse position when this pandemic, when the curve is flattened and it starts to sort of get under control. And putting that aside for a moment, the whole idea of flattening the curve is about not overwhelming the hospital system, so that even people that don't have COVID can't get into ICU or get hospital care. That's what the flattening the curve is. And that's why it's so important with the social distancing and isolating oneself at home and all of that, to prevent a mass infection of the population that overwhelms the hospital systems and means literally that millions of people will die. And, you know, as that CDC sort of doctor from the head of the Chinese CDC said, it's most contagious when people are asymptomatic. So you can go out and be mixing with a whole bunch of people who are mixing with a whole bunch of people and so forth, and you're shedding that virus, and they're shedding, then they get it and they're shedding the virus, and one person can end up infecting through the chain hundreds of people, and it just goes on from there, and that person hundreds of people, and that's how it's happened. And then the system is overflowing, and it may turn out that, you know, you're preaching of, oh, let's just leave it up to herd immunity, ends up killing people that you know, because that's how it, you know, that's how it might go. But does it matter if it's people that you know or not? Somebody knows those people. Somebody cares about those people. Somebody cared about those people that are in mass graves on that in New York now. If you've seen images of that, of, you know, stacking all these coffins on top of one another and covering them up with dirt. Somebody knew those people. Or maybe not. Maybe they were a homeless person that nobody knew. But everybody is important. Everybody, no matter if people knew them or not. It's kind of frightening to me, and also incredibly sad to think that some people think that people are just expendable and who gives a shit about them. I don't like to think that there's a lot of people that have that view. I don't like to think that that's how a lot of people think, because if that was the case, I'm not sure I want to live on a planet where people have that sort of attitude towards other human beings. You know, where we've become just like nothing. We already have that attitude to non-human animals. And I'm vegan. That's one of the reasons I'm vegan, because I value non-human animals. I don't see them as property, as expendable, as resources, as things. And you can see how an attitude like that we have to non-human animals, and I talk about this in my, I bring this up at various times, that all these discriminations are related. Discriminations like speciesism, sexism, heterosexism, classism, ableism, racism, all of those are interconnected. They all are faces of the same ignorance. They all cause violence. And where we have one, we'll have all of those discriminations. And so in a society where we basically, animal use is ubiquitous, it's everywhere, and a lot of people are not vegan still, our attitude towards non-humans, it doesn't stop at, now look at how we're speaking about humans. They're expendable. You know, I want mine, and so they're expendable because I want. You know, so this is where it's all related, and you know, it's like where you have what was that saying? Where you have slaughterhouses, there'll be battlefields, or something to that effect. You know, basically, if you have slaughterhouses in society, you know, you'll have war, because it's all connected. Anyway, I've sort of rambled around here, but I hope that I've made some connections. You know, firstly, the ultra-rich cannot escape social breakdown. Promoting herd immunity is a kind of a real mean-spirited and also a misguided position, because eventually that's going to turn, you're going to be a victim of that one day, that idea. Not necessarily the herd immunity idea, but the idea that certain groups are expendable and I don't care about them. You will one day be in that group, not necessarily because you're old, but because it'll be a group that groups in powerful people will consider expendable, and so you will become expendable and irrelevant in some way, because those attitudes don't stop there. It creeps along, and eventually you will be caught up in that and be a victim of it. So I hope that people will stop promoting that idea, because it's as that CDC Chinese doctor said, that's not the sort of thing people should be talking about in a civilized society. Do we have a civilized society? I'm not sure anymore. Anyway, thanks for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. Did I leave anything out? I think I just about covered everything, but please check out that video I did of the doctor, the ICU doctor, talking about this COVID-19. No, it's not a flu. And yes, governments can use these sort of things to bring in authoritarian measures. Of course they can. They'll use anything, if they can, right? But this is actually real too. You know, they can do this, but it is also real, this pandemic. And it's a zoonotic disease, animal to human. So think about going vegan. One of the many hundreds of reasons to go vegan. The most important is because animals are not here for us to use. Thanks for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. Keep well, stay at home, and let's make this something beneficial. May something good come of this, and may it not return to the disaster capitalist society that it was. May something good come of this, and may people wake up to what's going on, to what their governments are doing and their attitudes towards the masses and all of that. Bye for now.